Good morning, everyone. If you ever have one of those days, right, where it's a long day, things just didn't really go all that well, stressful, tired, you're worn out, end of the day. I had one of those days, and I found myself in that place where I often return to at the end of a really long, stressful day. So there I was, sitting in my car in the McDonald's drive-thru. I was getting ready to make my standard McDonald's order, medium French fries and a McDouble, 2 if it was a really long day. And as I was sitting there, I was struck by this profound thought. What is the difference between a McDouble and a double cheeseburger? Eh? Yeah, exactly. The mysteries of the universe. So as I was pondering, and it was my turn to order, I drove up to the very kind, wonderful drive-thru lady, and I said, "Could you please explain the difference between a McDouble and a double cheeseburger?" There was a long, awkward pause. "Well, yes, sir. A McDouble has ketchup and mustard and pickles." And she proceeded to describe all the condiments you put on a McDouble. And then she said, "However, a double cheeseburger has ketchup and mustard and pickles." And about halfway through, she said, it dawned on her she was just repeating the same list of condiments. And then she said, "Oh, I guess there is no difference." I left deeply unsatisfied with that answer. So I went back to McDonald's another time, and I was sitting in the drive-thru, and I made my order, and I asked the same question. "Excuse me, could you tell me the difference between a McDouble and a double cheeseburger?" And the person responded, "I'm not sure what the difference is, sir." And then I said, "That's it, I want to talk to a manager right now." I didn't really say that last part. Now, it's funny, the third time I asked this question, I was like a 17-year-old kid. And he's like, I said, "What's the difference between a double cheeseburger and a McDouble?" And he says, "Dude, it's one piece of cheese." So if you ever wanted to know the difference, one slice of cheese. A double cheeseburger has 2 slices of cheese. Now, I share this because I think it highlights a sort of a problem. These kind, wonderful people, they don't know exactly what they're making. Right? They're working hard, that's for sure. But they don't quite understand what they're making, or perhaps why they're making it. And if we're not clear on what we make and why we make it, we end up moving in directions and doing things that cause others to suffer. Like the time McDonald's introduced a healthy option to their menu. In the mid-1990s, they introduced the McLean Deluxe. Advertised as 91% fat-free, I don't know what that means. But the reason it was 91% fat-free was because they put seaweed in their burger. Gross. Now, the whole thing failed miserably. It was a giant disaster. McDonald's lost, they spent $150 million on marketing for this thing, and they lost tons of money. It was a colossal failure. They should have called it the McFlopper, you know? And that's the problem. They forgot what they do and why they do it. People don't go to McDonald's because they want a healthy option. They go there because they want a burger that makes you fat, right? Something delicious. And that's how they ended up with seaweeds in their burgers. They forgot what they make and why they make it. Now, that can happen to us in the church, in fact. when we lose sight of what we make and why we make it. Why do we do what we do? Why do we come here week after week? Why do we have all kinds of ministries and volunteers? Why are we busy doing all these sorts of things? We can get lost and forget what we make and why we make it. And when we do that, we end up moving in directions that perhaps God doesn't intend or doesn't desire for us, and we end up being busy doing all kinds of good things, but not the God thing. Not the most important thing of all. When we forget what we make and why we make it, the church suffers and the people we serve suffer. And then we end up with seaweed in our church. So what do we do here in the church? What do we make? Why do we make it? Well, our answer as always lies in, I skipped forward there. First of all, we're in this preaching series called The Essentials, okay? So we started this last week, and we're talking about, in the last several years, okay, we've had so much change, right, through the pandemic, and we've welcomed so many new faces. There's so many new people here, and it's really exciting. But as a consequence, that means it's time to remind ourselves of some of the elements of our culture that really make St. Benedict unique and special. Last week, Father Simon started us off by talking about the importance of our leadership culture. And today I want to focus on our central core mission, why we exist, what we make, and why we make it. Now, we can turn to the answer, receive the answer from the Word of God. And we read in the Gospel today on the day of the Ascension, which we celebrate today, 40 days after the events of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. He leads his disciples, his apostles, his closest friends and followers up a mountain, and he sends bodily into heaven, where he takes his seat at the right hand of God the Father, where he reigns as Lord of all creation. Before he leaves his closest and most personal, intimate friends, he doesn't leave them abandoned. He tells them exactly what he wants them to do. As Jesus ascends into glory, he gives the church its marching orders, and he says this. He says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations." This is what the church calls the Great Commission. It's the moment where Jesus, who has been invested with the authority, the authority of God himself, entrusts to the church its core, fundamental mission, the organizing principle around which it must do everything else, and towards which everything must be directed, making disciples. And so here at St. Benedict, Jesus' final command is our first priority, always. Go make disciples. That affects the announcements we make at the end of Mass. That affects the kinds of events and ministries that we do, that we participate, that we plan. That affects the ways we sort of interact with our broader community. It's the lens through which we have to see everything. We get distracted and busy, doing lots of good things, but not the God thing, which is to make disciples. You might say that, we often would say the church has a mission, but it might be more true to say that the mission has a church. And we are the church that God has called together, the Catholic Church of which we form a part, playing a role in the mission of making disciples. And we do this not because Father Simon came up with a great idea, hey, let's make disciples. Not because Father Alex came, not because there are a bunch of people in a boardroom whiteboarding some great, excellent mission statement. No, because Jesus himself entrusted this mission to his church, to us, and we all have a role to play in making disciples, which is why, our mission statement, we articulate it this way. We exist to make disciples who joyfully live out the mission of Jesus. Now, if we were left to do this on our own, it would be a pretty futile work. But we don't do this on our own human strength. We don't do it based on our own human creativity and strength. Because Jesus, when he ascended to the Father, he didn't leave us orphaned, but he poured out his Spirit upon all of his followers, upon all of his believers. And he told us, remember, I am with you always to the end of the age. You never have to do this alone. I'm with you. In fact, I'm with you right now by the grace and gift of my Spirit, which lives in you, with you, and through you. And this work of the mission, it's not just your work. I'm doing it, and you are called to participate, to share. That's why it's called a co-mission. Because it's a sharing in the one mission of Jesus Christ himself, who came to the earth to reveal the Father and draw all people to himself. And that's why every year we try to keep focused on what matters most by measuring what matters. New disciples. We have to constantly be asking ourselves the question, are we making disciples here at St. Benedict Church? And we want to celebrate what God is doing in the lives and hearts of people all the time as he draws them to himself and uses us to play a part in that mission. And so we're going to celebrate new disciples today, which we'll do in a minute. But first I want to say a little bit about what is a disciple. What is a disciple? If I could boil it all down to its most basic, fundamental, it would be this. A disciple is a person who has responded to an invitation from Jesus to follow him. Often it's someone who's had a kind of personal, meaningful, spiritual experience of Jesus through the Holy Spirit that's begun to change them interiorly. As they sort of begin to become aware that God is alive and real and active in the world. And as a consequence of that, these people begin to change. Something happens inside of them. They begin perhaps praying more often, going to church more consistently. Perhaps they begin to get involved somehow in church and serving others. They begin to make lifestyle changes that almost seem to happen on their own as they become slowly changed from the inside out. And at some point, they become aware of a deepening, growing relationship with God. Now, just to fill this out, I want to share a story about a guy named Mike. Now, Mike had grown up Catholic. He received his sacraments. He was an altar boy growing up. And his whole life, he believed in God. And he prayed. But as he grew up, things happened. Right? Like it does to all of us. We suffer heartache and heartbreak and suffering, family difficulties, there's loss, there's the various pains of life, something we can all understand. And through that time, Mike began to drift away from the church, from God. Now here's the thing, he never stopped believing in God. And he would even pray occasionally, when he felt he needed it. But he found himself drifting away from the church and the practice of faith. Now, in early 2022, Mike began to feel a kind of desire or a draw after many, many years to go back to church. He was a little bit afraid, and so he checked us out on live stream, right? St. Benedict live stream, just to get a sense for us. After several weeks, he began to attend in person. And he said as he attended church, he began to experience God's presence with him when he was here at the parish. Then he took a next step, which for him meant taking Alpha, right? And he experienced drawing deeper in relationship with God and some of the different elements of faith. Later, he served on the team. Now, 12 months ago at Sunday Mass, just like today, when we wanted to celebrate new disciples that we had made in the last year, Mike stood up, identified himself as a person who had begun following Jesus. And he said, I am a disciple. I'm a new disciple. Mike later shared his story with us in 2022, later shared his story with us, and he said this, I quote, in a few months since I returned to the Catholic Church, open myself to a relationship with Jesus and surrender to God, it is difficult to verbally describe the joy in my heart. Mike described how there was always a lingering sense of emptiness in his life until he had come to this deeper realization and relationship with Jesus that filled this place inside his heart that nothing else in the world had ever been able to fill for him. You see, Mike had become a disciple, a follower of Jesus, and begun to experience that inner transformation of his life and his heart as a consequence. See, that is what we're about here at St. Benedict Parish. We're about reconnecting people to the heart of God and helping them follow Jesus. Now, maybe there are people here today, like Mike, who in the last 12 months have begun this journey of following Jesus, begun to experience some inner change in their hearts and their lives. And today we want to celebrate what God is doing in your life and in your heart, inside of you, as He's begun to awaken a deeper faith and reveal Himself. And that applies to you whether, like Mike, you came from a faith background, you were raised in the church, or perhaps you came from no faith background and you'd never been to church, but only in the last 12 months you've started experiencing and journeying and exploring faith. If that's you, if you can identify with Mike's story, and that happening to you in the last 12 months, we want to celebrate that. And so this is what I'd like you to do. I'd like every single person here, if you have a cell phone, a smartphone, you want to pull that out for me. I'm going to ask you to fill out a little online form here. So if you have a phone, pull it out. What I'd like you to do, if you know how to do this, I want you to scan the QR code. If you're online, you can go to stbenedict.ca/survey, or you can open that from your browser on your phone. There's a brief 3-question survey. So I'd like you to fill that out right now. If you could go ahead and do that. Every single person here. There are 3 questions. It'll take you about 30 seconds. If you identify with Mike's story, you might want to select that first. On the first question, you might want to answer the first way I've encountered Jesus in a meaningful way for the first time. So go ahead and start to do that. If you are not able to do that, I'll zoom in on the QR code. If you're not able to do that, we're going to hand out paper forms for those of you who don't have a cell phone with you today or are not able to fill out an online form. So if you want to just raise your hand if you want a paper hard copy, and someone from hospitality will come by and give you one. So we'll just give you about 2 minutes to do that. Real quick, 3 questions. And if you're filling it on a card, please select only one option from those 6. Just choose one, okay? Not more than one, just the one that best describes you.